Well, good day, everybody. This is Joe Van Cleve. Hey, welcome to yet another episode of, yes, the Typewriter video series. I'm glad you're back, and today I have a pair of Royal Mercuries made by Silver Seiko in the early 1970s. You guys saw this one in the last episode. This is my new Royal Mercury, which we will talk about in a little bit. It's not so new. This is the Alpha typewriter in my collection. This was the first typewriter I got in the mid-aughts when I first got interested in typewriters. But this was the first one I went out and sought out an ultra-portable typewriter because I really wanted to have a travel typewriter. And I've had it ever since. This is my so-called beach typewriter. I've taken it out to the California coast at least 3 times on vacation and sat on the beach and typed. So these two typewriters we're going to talk about today. Stay tuned. Because there were so many different models, variations, typefaces made on typewriters, it's often the case that when you get 2 of the same model, they're not always identical. But in this case, these are really close. The keyboards themselves are identical. Identical symbols. Even the keys are identical. In fact, everything about these 2 machines is essentially identical with the exception of the ribbon covers. The typefaces are identical. And as far as the year of manufacture, I've always called this typewriter the older typewriter in my collection because I got it the first. But this is actually made in 1973. This new Royal Mercury, new to me, is 1971. So the new one that was barely ever used, almost like new old stock, is 2 years older than this one. And there are a little bit of differences in the way the 2 typewriters feel. I would attribute that to the fact that, well, this new older one feels a little smoother. The one that's been in my collection for probably 10 years or more, it just probably needs to be degreased a little bit. The universal bar that actuates all the features on the typewriter, it's doing a lot of things. It's not just, you're not just raising the type bar. And in imprinting, you're operating the ribbon spools, and you're raising the ribbon vibrator, and you're operating the escapement. And if any of those mechanically have some binding heaviness because of solidified greases and lubricants, it'll make the overall touch or feel of the typewriter a little bit heavier. So there is a little bit of a difference between the 2 I've noticed, but it's real subtle. But let's take a look here in a little more detail about these 2 typewriters. So as I said, they're essentially the same body style and the same color. And if you take the ribbon covers off, they are the same typewriter. You couldn't tell them apart. But the difference is when you go to reattach the ribbon covers, you might notice that the 1971 version is a ½ an inch shorter than the 1973 version. And that's because the profiles of the ribbon covers are different. The 1973 has this kind of a raised wedge kind of effect, whereas the 71 model is a little more flat. Of course, a few styling differences, like this one has the chocolate brown trim on the top of the ribbon cover and on the front here, and this one has just the off-white color and little fine horizontal grooved design with a royal symbol. And this royal symbol is raised letters, and the Lytton insignia is after the word royal, whereas this one is painted and the Lytton insignia is before the royal, and it has the word Lytton down below, which is interesting. So the difference is really, as far as the height of it, comes down to the ribbon cover. But once you put the lid, the clamshell carrying lid over the typewriters, both of these, they are essentially the same size externally when you're carrying them. So there's no real size advantage when you're carrying them, but there is a size difference when you have them deployed for use. I've noticed this about my typewriter hobby, is that as the years go by and I've learned more about typewriters, I become more educated about them, and then my opinion of that I held about certain machines or whatever changes as I gain new information, new insight. And this is one of these cases. When I first acquired this typewriter in roughly 2000, maybe 6 or whatever, I really thought it had a great touch to it. Now, I'd never experienced a 5 Series Smith Corona. I didn't experience a Skywriter or an Olympia SM Series typewriter or Hermes, so I didn't have anything to go by, but I thought it was a pretty good touch. But now, having taken it out of the closet in preparation for this video and comparing, first of all, sitting down and using it, I felt, well, that's kind of a little heavier of a touch than I remember, even with the touch selector set all the way to the low position. And it reminded me a lot of my brother typewriters that seem to be a little bit heavier in touch than what I really like. When you get spoiled with a new machine or a nicer machine, then you go back to these kind that weren't designed to have as light of a touch. But I did, when I sat down last evening with the newer Royal Mercury out on the patio and typed something, I noticed after a while, it too started to feel on my fingers like, it's starting to feel like a little heavier than, it's not a Skywriter, let's put it that way. It didn't feel as light as I was hoping it would feel. And so last evening, I decided, let's take a look at the touch adjustment here. It goes from low to high. Let's see what it actually does and see if I can affect any change to it. And so what I found was when you're operating the touch adjustment, you're actually affecting the position of this looped little bracket. And what's pulling on the end of this bracket is a spring, this spring right here. And it's essentially pulling on the universal bar. This up here is the universal bar. And so when you type a character, the universal bar lifts up. And what was happening is at the heaviest touch setting, this spring back here is always under tension. And at the lightest setting of touch, it was barely under tension, but still being slightly stretched over to this hooked bracket that operates the touch selector here. And so what I simply did, as you can see, is I disconnected that spring from this bracket. And so the universal bar here is simply under its own weight. The weight of the universal bar is what returns it into position right there. And what I discovered by doing that is it actually makes the touch lighter than the lightest setting would otherwise be. Now, doing this, the touch selector doesn't do anything anymore because that bracket down there is being disconnected from the spring, but it makes it a lighter touch than it would be otherwise. Now, I also noticed that if I raised up the universal bar slightly and then tried typing, man, it makes the touch really much lighter. But when you're doing that, you're already starting to pull on these linkages. And so if you raise this up too much, preload it, so to speak, it's going to start giving you performance issues with your ribbon advance and your vibrator. I disconnected the spring on both of these machines, and both of them, I affected a noticeable lightness, a lighter touch than would otherwise have been even at the lightest setting on the adjustment. So I'm happy about that. I think I'm going to leave it there. There are several occasions that I've had very similar typewriters in my collection. I think when I had my Smith Corona Silent and Silent Super, what you would really like in certain circumstances to have really identical machines. And then you can do some comparisons between them. And this is the first opportunity I've had to have nearly identical machines, not only in model appearance, but also in terms of year of manufacturers. They're only 2 years apart, and the condition is pretty good. One of the things that I've been seeing on the Facebook Antique Typewriters group is people talking about how to reduce the sound of the noise of the typewriter as you're using it. And one of the ideas that a person came up with is to put some kind of a sound dampening material in the underneath side of the typewriter on the bottom plate. So as you might recall, these typewriters have a sealed up base. The theory is that the sound of the mechanism is reflecting off of the base of the typewriter up through the opening in the ribbon cover and causing some of the sound that we hear. There is some factory installed sound deadening, but it looks really thin, almost like tar paper. It's so thin. I don't think it's very functional at all. And so I've been looking for some sound deadening material, and the person on Facebook suggested a 3 or 4 millimeter thick yoga mat, which is kind of puffy, has little cells of air or something in it. And I was just tired and didn't want to go to the store. I did see some bubble wrap. I had a roll of bubble wrap, but this is closer to 3/16 of an inch thick, a little bit too thick, I thought. And being plastic like this, I'm not really sure how well it would work for sound deadening. And so I was kind of looking around and to see what else I might use to experiment with sound deadening. And I remember I had a whole bag of these shop rags. I bought these, I guess, in an auto parts store, but they basically look like face towels, face cloths, and they have a hemmed edge. And so what I did this morning is I took the older one in my collection, okay, the brown trim, and I took it apart this morning, and I had to clean it up. I took an opportunity to degrease it, and there was a lot of residue inside. But anyways, I took the opportunity to take one of these shop towels. I cut the hem off, and then I cut it to size to fit on the bottom plate. And I taped it along the edge with this inch-wide gaffer's tape. And the intention with the gaffer's tape is really to seal up the edge so you don't have these little particles of cloth shedding off inside the typewriter. But my initial test was kind of, I did notice a difference, so I'm curious now on camera whether I can affect a change in the sound deadening properties of this typewriter. So this typewriter is factory standard. This one has the sound deadening, I'm hoping a sound deadening shop cloth, kind of face towel, terry cloth kind of material. The overall loudness is very similar, but it sounds like this one has less of a high-pitched tinny noise to it, where this one is a little higher pitched. So it's kind of muted on the high end, it seems like. Now, this experiment is totally non-scientific, and it probably will give different results based on what material you're using underneath the typewriter also. But I did notice with the bottom of this typewriter off, sitting on this carpeted table surface, that it also sounded more muted as well. So there is something going on there with having better sound absorbing material underneath the typewriter. Now, you only have so much clearance, and you have to keep the material away from the edge, otherwise you won't be able to get the bottom put on properly. And it can also interfere with the relative alignments, vertical alignments of your upper and lower case, for instance. So you got to make sure that doesn't happen. But anyways, an interesting experiment. But I couldn't do this experiment this way without having two nearly identical typewriters in nearly the same condition. If you're a collector of typewriters, you might want to have a wide variety of different brands and models and styles of typewriters in your collection, but there's something to be said for having several samples of nearly the same machine. And I remember when I was early on troubleshooting the escapement problem in my Silent Super, Smith Corona Silent Super, it was an intermittent skipping problem, and one of the things that really helped me was having the other typewriter, the silent variation, to compare. I could take both of them side by side, look underneath the typewriters at the escapement, and see how they work, see how the parts were aligned, and etc. I also remember I had at one time in my collection two Olivetti Lettera 22s, and I was also having some escapement issues with those machines. And having two machines, again, it was really good to have one to compare against another. So there is a good reason that you might not want to diversify too much in your collection. Maybe you like a certain kind of typewriter. Hey, collect a couple of them, right? Well, this is Joe Van Cleve with yet another typewriter video series, and hope you guys stay creative. And next week I'll be publishing the results from the latest typing assignment. We have some good entries already. Look forward to that. Until then, you guys have yourselves a great day.